Welcome back to the Grow Like a Mother podcast. I am your host, Jill Wright, time management strategist, author, podcaster, speaker, and I am so happy to continue to bring you some incredible guests. This podcast is so fun for me personally because I get to bring on people who inspire me and I can learn from and who give such practical, wise advice. And bonus, I get to share that with all of you. So today is no different. I have a guest today named Amanda Preston, who is the CEO of Deer Creek Family Support and Therapy, which is a multidisciplinary mental health clinic which specializes in supporting neurodivergent families, of which mine is, and many of yours as well. So this is a really pertinent and poignant conversation to be having today. Amanda also runs Amanda Preston Co., which is a company that offers parenting support and online courses. She's an author. She's a founder of a national nonprofit, a social worker, and she's raising by adoption 8 neurodivergent children. So we can all just take a breath with our crazy chaos and acknowledge what her life might be like. I'm really excited to learn from her today. I think it's going to be so important for us to really be able to dive into this conversation. We're talking about self-care, specifically writing for wellness, how to make time for it, and how not taking time for it can really actually lead to burnout. And so this conversation is something I'm really looking forward to. And I also want to direct you back to a conversation I had with Haiba Tanvir, who is an emotional intelligence expert. Haiba is just such a wonderful person to be connected with in general, but I want you to go back and listen to the episode I did with her called The Best Way to Raise Emotionally Intelligent Kids. This conversation happened back in season 3, so I'll link in the show notes so you can access it easily. We got to talk about self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship building, all in the effort to create a nurturing home environment. And I feel like the piece about self-care that we're talking about today really lends itself well to this conversation, because Haiba gave us some practical tips, like using creative methods to help our kids express their emotions, set clear boundaries. It really emphasized the journey that emotional intelligence is, not only for the parents, but for the kids, and fostering this deep connection. And I don't know about you guys, but I cannot do any of that unless I am taking care of myself. I am regulated. Like, I'm not showing up as a person I want to be. I literally cannot access my emotional intelligence until I've done my self-care. So to me, these episodes go really well hand in hand together. I can't wait to hear what you think about both. And without further ado, we're going to dive right into this conversation with Amanda. Amanda, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me today.
It's so fun to have you here, a fellow Canadian and an Albertan, which is near and dear to my heart, as we were talking about before we hit record. And so everyone who's listening already kind of knows what you're about from your bio, but I am always curious to know, like, who is Amanda outside of that? And what is it that particularly inspired you to get into the type of work that you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I find that my work life always follows my personal life. My husband and I started the adoption process when we were like 19 and 20 years old. And so originally I went back to school to be a social worker and pursued everything adoption and foster care related. But a lot of people know that there's a lot of neurodivergence in that world. So we ended up with 8 kids, and through that, a lot of different diagnoses. So autism, PDA, FASD, different things like that. And so after working in the nonprofit world for a lot of years, I realized there was a lot of gaps in the neurodivergent world for support, particularly around PDA, which was a newer diagnosis for our family. And so I was just exploring that and learning more about it. And so finally, I was like, I just really want to kind of fill that gap, especially after my nonprofit experience. And so I started a clinic focused on that, and just this passion to make sure everyone was trained in a neuroaffirming approach and all the information on things like autism and PDA and supporting families and burnout and everything that we experience. And trying to find a lot of people that had lived experience. So whether they were neurodivergent themselves or parents of neurodivergent kids. So really, it's just kind of echoing my own personal life. I've got 8 children. They've all got different diagnoses. So trying to create things that I would have found helpful. Well, still now, but even earlier on in my life as well.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for doing this work because it is becoming much more uh I don't know if common, but culturally talked about neurodivergence and how we can really work with the kids and what kind of support the parents need to be able to avoid burnout. Because I mean, I also have two neurodivergent kids. I got dyslexia. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on in our household as well, where we see it firsthand how it can be really challenging. And a lot of people who aren't in this world don't realize the behind the scenes um, work necessarily that goes into having this sort of like normal appearance on the outside. And so they can't relate to feeling the same level of burnout or level of stress. All that to say, I think that the parents in these households who are doing the work of consciously raising people who have different functioning brains, we need some support. And I love the approach that you take to help us get some of that self-care back in our day. I want to talk to you about the writing for wellness. I want to talk to you about how we can, like, as a time management strategist, I'm curious, like, how do you recommend we fit it in our days? Um, so yeah, like, maybe let's start with the just the general idea of self-care for the parents and why it's important.
Yeah, I mean, I think so many people have already heard it so many times that you can't pour from an empty cup. What is challenging with parents who are raising neurodivergent kids is that self-care is something that's really hard to access. So, we don't want to trivialize it down to things like, oh, I got to have a shower today, because that's just a human need. I wouldn't classify that as self-care. But it's often hard to, for example, get out of our house to go and do something. It's often hard to find time to do a hobby. A lot of the things that we might, think of when it comes to self-care is just not as accessible for us. So trying to figure out ways that we can still fill our cup, still give us some, breath to our life, so that we can help our kids. Because if we're burnt out, it's so much harder for us to have anything left to give. So just really having to be creative and thinking how to do that. And for me, writing is one that I think is really helpful. There's a few things. Writing is one of them. There's also a group that I have just been like on this kick of supporting called Mothers Together, which actually is I can talk about that later, but it's kind of the same philosophy as writing self-care, but it's with humans. And so it's a really great way of getting self-care, because you can access support and friends through a virtual app versus having to go out in person, which is just very hard for us. So these are just some of the things that, can help with your own mental health, but still be done from the comfort of your home.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you mentioned Mothers Together. Megan Champion came on the podcast earlier this year.
Oh, nice.
For those of you who don't know, she has an Instagram account that's very popular called On the Hard Days, a podcast as well. And she runs this community for parents, moms specifically, who are in this on this journey and creating a supportive environment. So I will make sure that I link that episode in the show notes as well, in case you're curious to dive down that rabbit hole.
Perfect.
But yeah, it is true that we really need to consciously sort of take the support and the time, or else it's not going to happen naturally in our days. It is really difficult to find. And I personally also love writing as an outlet. How did you find that that worked for you? Like, when did you discover this was a really great tool?
I think, just throughout my adult life, I have started to realize how helpful it is. But the more I got into writing myself, I'm an author. And so I have a book that's actually coming out April 16th. It's for foster care. It's a foster care related book. But as I started to kind of go down that journey of writing the book, I was able to let out a lot of things that were on my mind, a lot of things that you keep bottled inside that just in general conversation don't always come out. It's not something that you might talk about or that people know to ask. And writing, you can guide it to things that are really important to you, to things that are, that you really want to address or figure out. And I just realized that I was able to get out so much more. And even the nice thing about writing is that even if no one ever sees it, even if it's just a crumpled up piece of paper or you throw it in the garbage afterwards, there's this very therapeutic peace when you get it out on paper and it's out of your body, it's out of your mind, and it's written down there. And so for me, that kind of just opened up that door of, what more can writing do besides just telling my story, but from a therapeutic perspective.
Mm-hmm. It's the mind body connection, right? And it's really important to do it pen to paper. It doesn't have the same effect if you're typing it or sort of using your thumbs on your phone, right? It's that the physical, it's taking everything from inside and literally putting it out. I think that is the magic. And until you try it and experience it, you don't get it. You're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But until you're in it, you don't necessarily understand and appreciate how valuable it can be. And I think that having someone to lead and guide you through the first attempts, or even if you've been doing it forever, having somebody there to help facilitate the experience for you can be really valuable. Can you share about the Writing for Wellness workshops that you've got going on?
Yeah, it kind of takes it to that next level. It's a virtual workshop, so it can be done, anywhere in the world for people who want to join it. But we find that when people do it with other people who are like-minded or who have gone through some of the same journeys. So, for example, I've got two that are coming up, and one is for parents of neurodivergent kids, and one is for foster and adoptive parents who've experienced grief and loss. So, when you group them together with that shared experience, it really provides that therapeutic outcome because you hear, first of all, what other people are going through, because you do share some of your writing, and it actually can help inspire things within yourself. Like, oh, like that's what I feel, that's what I've gone through. So it does provide that solidarity, of course, but it can help stir more thoughts. It can help you feel like, oh, I'm not alone in this, or I'm not crazy. And it really just does help with that healing process. And it also helps when you are just doing like therapy, for example. There's a bit of a confine in it. Whereas when you turn to paper and you're doing it in a group, it can help get to that self piece, and in a quick way, because you're really digging deep quite quickly in what you're trying to discuss or get to the root of. And so it's just a great way to figure out, some of your feelings that aren't always on the surface for us, because a lot of us, we don't have that capacity to deal with our own issues, or we're burnt out, or we're exhausted. As we start to creep up in age, more things happen, like perimenopause and different things like that. And so we don't always have that time to deal with what's going on in our own head and our own heart. And writing is such a great way, to kind of pull some of those things out.
Yeah. And I can almost hear some of the listeners being like, yeah, well, I'm not creative. I'm not a writer. I don't have anything to say. And you'd be surprised what happens when you just set a timer, commit to spending 10 minutes, pen to
Yeah.
paper, what will flow out of you that you didn't even know was there.
Yeah, because it's not about being like a professional writer, and that's not the goal. It's not to create some beautiful poem, which actually can come so often from people who have zero writing experience, just as a side note. But it's about just getting to like the nitty-gritty of your feelings. So, we start a lot with like imagery, activities that can get you thinking of different things. We focus a lot on metaphor because some issues that we go through are quite painful, and it's really hard to access them, but metaphor can kind of come around the side door and get at some of those things. We do letters, which is actually a really strong activity where you write a letter to someone, and it could be to yourself, it could be to your child, it could be to a family member. Maybe they, are no longer supporting you the way you need to, or a child that you lost. But even just something as simple as a letter, which is, nothing fancy in terms of writing skills, can be very healing and open up a lot of things that you didn't realize were going on, but also release some of those feelings to actually move on to healing.
Hmm. And by doing this, we create space in ourselves to to do the other pieces of life that we've been either putting on the back burner, like some of these self-care things, or to be able to open ourselves up more in relationship or capacity for compassion, or whatever the thing is. By creating space in ourselves through getting things out on paper, we're really growing. Like I can almost see it like our bubble of influence is growing as we do this work. Um, and I think that's really cool. And as I am reflecting back on your story and who you are and what you do, what your life is like, I'm really curious about your other forms of self-care. Writing obviously is a really good one.
Yeah.
What else do you do? Because you have 8 kids, whether they're neurodivergent or not. That's a lot of kids. I have half that amount, and it still feels like 1,000. So, talk to us about that. Give us some inspiration. I know we are all curious what it looks like in the life of Amanda with 8 kids. How do you find time for yourself? What do you do?
Well, for starters, I do have a very helpful husband. We do a lot of tag teaming. So we unfortunately are not quite in the stage yet due to, ages and needs where we can go out and do things um, like dates too often. But when we do, we really enjoy ballroom dancing. That's something that's kind of fun. It's not child related. We can do it together. So if there are opportunities that arise, we'll do that. And, that's a mix of like ballroom or Latin. And since we've been in Alberta, because we've only been in Alberta for 3 years, we took a course on line dancing or two-stepping actually, which was really exciting. A line dancing one is coming up. So if we can make that work, we'll definitely do that. I enjoy just honestly a night at home with a movie sometimes. Going out onto our farm. We left the big city behind 3 years ago and started a homestead here in Alberta. So we've got like a milk cow and sheep and chickens and different animals. So just going outside and being with the animals, that combination of the sun, vitamin D, it is the sunniest province. It is, I can't say enough good things about the sun here. But that I find that very helpful, actually, just getting in the fresh air. Sometimes a lot of us are exhausted and introverted and just want to stay home. But getting out into the sun, being with animals, being with nature, I find really helpful. A phone call with a friend is a really great one. That Mothers Together, like I mentioned, is a self-care for me. So, I'll kind of lock my office door and go do a little message with friends on there, which is great. Actually, we did a road trip across the US this summer, and I got to meet 2 friends from Mothers Together, which was amazing. One in Minnesota and one in Alabama. So that was exciting. And one lives locally. So, going out with her for coffee. So those are probably my main ones. I do enjoy my ADHD side of me enjoys um being busy and starting things and being creative. So I love just like creating things. So it's kind of work related, but I'll create online courses or different things like that, little projects, because it just really gives me a big dopamine hit. And even though it's kind of worky, it's a little bit calming for me as well.
I can totally relate to that. I find work to be self-care.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I totally get that. I'd love to learn a little bit more about the courses that you have that you develop because they're parenting focused. Is that right?
Most of them, yeah, yeah. It's a kind of a mix between because I left one world behind and kind of focus more on the other, and then I jump back, and so it's a mix between neurodivergence parenting and foster care, adoption, social work. So both of those are really big passions for me, and so I'll do a little bit of both. But right now, I think my main focus is the neurodivergence world and really sharing on PDA. I just went and did a big workshop actually on Saturday that was great where they had disability organizations came out, teachers came out, and it was all on neuroaffirming approaches and then an introduction to pathological demand avoidance, which is the PDA. And it was just great to see the professionals coming out so that we can kind of trickle through some of these approaches, not just at home, not just from us parents, but from the school as well. So that was really encouraging. So yeah, just different things like that or things that I like to spend my time on.
That's awesome. And it's really cool to see all of those professionals that came together to do this type of community because it really does require support from all angles, right? Like as parents, we can do as much as we can do, and we can do it in the home and we can advocate in the school system or if we're homeschooling, whatever. But there are so many pieces to the puzzle, and having access and open dialogue with therapists and different people who can support a child, even if they're not on your child's official team, right? Is so cool. I'm curious though, just going back real quick, where did you move from, and what was it like to move with a family of 10 interprovincially?
We moved from the Lower Mainland, Vancouver, BC, that area, and it was crazy. It was like just after COVID, and traveling was a bit trickier, and just doing anything really was trickier. So we bought our house sight unseen, which was kind of crazy to buy like a acreage without ever seeing it. So kind of arriving here was our first time ever seeing our home. Trying to pack everyone up was an absolute gong show because silly me, I was like, oh, hiring a moving company is like tens of thousands of dollars. Let's just do it ourselves. And like as we were loading up, we didn't have enough trucks. We're scrambling to find more trucks and more drivers to drive across province, and we had dogs with us that couldn't go in hotels and trying to get other people to help with that. It was chaos. But we did survive it.
Right. You're there now. You're settled.
Yeah, yeah.
I love that. And I love that you mentioned earlier as well the element of going out into nature to sort of help reset and help because the sunlight and the fresh air and the seeing of the living things from Mother Earth, like that helps regulate our bodies in a way that we dismiss often or don't give enough credit to in our modern world. And it's, like probably a lot easier for you on a homestead in Alberta to be able to access that. But I just want to offer to anyone listening who lives in an urban situation or maybe in an apartment, they don't even have outside land. Like you can still go outside, you can still open a window, you can still have a conversation with a houseplant. Like there are so many ways you can still bring in that goodness. Just because you don't live, on the Yellowstone doesn't mean that you can't still access these really good things.
Yeah, it's so true. People do, they really just think, oh, that's, like I don't think nearly enough credit is given to that. But the reality is, and research shows, and I mean, just go try it, is if you are struggling, if you're having an anxiety situation at home, if you're just really stressed out, if you're feeling really low, if you just go outside, and again, it can be in an urban area, like you said, and just go walk for even 5 minutes, it totally resets your brain. It just really that fresh air combination with the sunlight is such a big difference, which is one thing that made Alberta so much lovelier because BC is so rainy.
Yeah.
That was a big difference. But it's such a useful tool, and it's so easy. It's free. You can do it anywhere. If you have a partner home, just leaving them with the kids for 5 minutes to get outside is usually not too tricky. And if you don't have someone bringing your kids out with you, because it's great for them too. If anyone's ever looked into that 1,000 hours outside, our family is trying to do that this year for the first time, but it's a really great, they have a podcast about it and you can look into that, but just trying to get those 1,000 hours outside because it's great for everyone.
It is. And they've got some cool graphics too to support the tracking of the time. I like their organization very much. Yeah. We're so aligned in a lot of different things. It's been really fun being able to chat with you today and to be able to dive a bit deeper into the reasons like why it's important that we carve out this time for ourselves, why writing can be such a phenomenal tool to be able to release and self-discovery, and it is such a potent form and free of self-care, right? We can access it anytime. We don't need to spend money on it. But before we wrap up, I just want to ask if there's anything that feels really important to share with the audience that we haven't touched on, or any kind of message that you just want to make sure all the moms hear today.
I think one of my biggest things is just make sure you have support. Even if it's just one good friend, even if it's, looking on your local Facebook group, especially if you're a parent of a neurodivergent kid, but even if you're not, humans need that support. See what's going on locally. It can feel so uncomfortable, but reaching out, starting something if nothing's going on in your area, but trying to get at least one, maybe a few friends that you can connect with about what's going on in life. I find that that's going to be one of the easiest ways to stay healthy, no matter what, no matter who you are, to just stay healthy is to have those people in your life who really get you and are supportive, in supporting your mental health.
Yeah, so important. And I like how you identified, like, even if it's just one person. I hear a lot of moms, we kind of throw up excuses and boundaries on ourselves where it's like, well, I don't have a village. We don't need, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Like, we can have one or two key resources, even if it's like a respite center. It doesn't have to be a person necessarily if you're new somewhere. There, just acknowledging what you do have can open up more doors, even if it's not as much support as you want to have. You know what I mean? Just being really grateful for what supports are in place will open you up to more, if that makes
Yeah.
any sense.
Yeah, for sure. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, we're going to make sure that the links to sign up for your workshop are in the show notes because there is time. If you're hearing this, it's early April and your workshops are happening late April, early May. So anyone who is interested in joining Amanda with the Writing for Wellness workshops, whether it be for the foster system or for the neurodivergent focused one, I think those would be really great resources to jump on. So make sure you head to the show notes and check those out. Um, yeah. This has been so fun. Thank you for sharing with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. That was great getting to know you, and hopefully it's helpful for people who are listening.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be. And I think that the more that we have these discussions, the more we can offer little tidbits, little breadcrumbs of like, oh, this is an idea of like, oh, PDA, I hadn't heard of that. Let me look that up. Or I didn't know about the, like whatever these pieces are. This is the thing I love about podcasts, especially if you liked this episode, like come back and listen to it in a couple weeks again, because you're going to hear something different when you listen to it again. That's going to be another support and resource for you. And this is the beautiful thing. We sort of like take different things when we're in different phases of life, even if a couple weeks can make a bit of a difference in our mindset. So,
Yeah.
yeah, awesome. Okay, well, make sure you follow Amanda on Instagram or Facebook. Let her know that you heard about her here on the podcast, and please go check out that workshop because I think that's going to be really fun and very useful. And until next week, keep on growing like a mother.